and welcome to the Driven Career Podcast. This is the channel where we talk about professional life, personal development, all the things that are meant to inspire you to overcome challenges and grow in your career. And today I have here Curt and Jimmy. They are recruiters in Vancouver, BC, Canada. And we're going to have a conversation talking about the trends in the recruitment, things that we should know when we're applying for jobs, get some insights of what the companies are looking for, and just really share a conversation that will be helpful for you to work on your strategy on your job search. But first of all, let's start with our introductions. So let's start with you, Curt, telling us who you are and what do you do?
Sure. So I'm Curt. I work for an external recruitment agency called Ignite Technical. You can see with our cool brand logoing right here. We specialize in IT recruitment, especially in the Western Canada market, but we'll do all over and things like that. IT recruitment being any information technology or related roles like project manager, stuff like that. Jimmy will talk about that more. But I'm the account manager, so I do a lot of the business-facing stuff. I talk to the businesses, I find out what they need, I make relationships with them, and I help make sure that the final stages of people getting jobs and stuff like that get finished. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. How about you,
Yeah.
Jimmy? Tell us.
Yeah, and I'm kind of on the other side of the business. I'm a recruiter, so I'm the person that's actually talking to candidates on a day-to-day basis. So essentially, like an easy way to put this is Curt finds the jobs, and then I find people for the jobs.
Wonderful. Good partnership. All right.
Oh,
So
thanks.
let's talk about the trends. So since you guys are in the market, you guys are on the search and closely working with the companies, what can we just start talking about? What are the major trends that you have noticed and seen in the market right now?
I think the most obvious trend right now, and you could see this LinkedIn's job report most recently, is that AI is definitely up. I think the biggest difference that the report doesn't show is that people don't have a consensus on what AI actually means. So there's a lot of different types of AI roles, whether it is an actual machine learning engineers that's building on the LLM, or they have now what's called like an AI prompt engineer, which are people that are optimizing the way that prompts are going into these LLMs to give the right answers. And then obviously a lot of different business applications around that whole growing industry. So AI as a whole is definitely the biggest trend right now. And along that, a lot of data roles, because it's such a data reliant. I mean, everything in IT is really just about ones and zeros. So data roles are always there. But obviously with this new whole industry that's being built up, data is going to be right beside it, adjusting as well.
Nice. Do you want to say anything, Curt? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go for it. So I talked to a lot of the employers and stuff too. And I know, yes, they're thinking about AI for sure. There's a couple clients we have, they're dipping their toes into it, kind of see what's going on. And a lot of it is they're thinking, okay, well, I need an expert, somebody who knows what's going on to help guide us where we should go with AI. But what I hear more from the employer side is them discovering what they want to do, work from home, work in office, or some hybrid shift in that. And I guess for me, the thing that I'm noticing the most, especially recently, is all the different models work. It just depends on how thought out they are, right? Like it just like you can have somebody in every day, or you can have somebody that never comes in. You can have people that work from all over the world. You can have all people work in the same office, same spot. It just depends on how you set it up to make sure that it actually is functional, right? And all the different combinations require, planning to see how you want to do it. I know for the past that though, a lot of it is they're worried about retention and stuff like that too. So they're thinking, okay, if I give people one day in office, is that going to scare people off, or is that going to encourage people to be here? And it's a lot of planning around that. So that's kind of the big trend I've seen recently. I don't know, it's been going that way since essentially COVID started, right? But it's continuing. That's the big one on people's minds right now, I think.
Yeah. And that's a good point starting with the AI technology, because another thing is what I wonder, and I'm interested to hear from you guys' point of sight in terms of the recruitment, like what has the AI been transforming your search? Because we hear a lot about, customizing our resumes and putting, making sure that it's ATS friendly and all of that. What you guys could share on that sense to help out candidates to understand how they have to prepare, what they should know when we're talking about the AI world in the search and the recruitment process?
I think it's a bit unique on our end in terms of AI, because since we're specifically working on technical roles, a lot of times it's really how much in depth you've actually worked on these AI projects. Now, if you're stepping aside to more functional roles, then the usage of AI means a complete different thing, right? So a lot of feedback that we get from clients in terms of technical side is, everybody has touched AI at some point, but being a user of AI and being someone that actually understands or building the back end of everything are complete separate roles. So it really just depends on the person, the type of roles that they're trying to go for. Because I think at this point, everybody's going to put ChatGPT in their resume at some point. And so it almost becomes, from a recruiter's perspective, it almost nullifies everything, because if I type in ChatGPT on a search, everyone's resume is going to come up. So that doesn't actually help me find the person I'm looking for. So instead, what I have to then look for is, okay, what did you use ChatGPT for? Are you using it to respond to emails? Are you using it to proofread? Even for like marketing people, are they using it for copywriting and things like that? So for my job, it's really trying to figure out what the differentiation is. When someone puts AI, ChatGPT, what other words goes along with that? That really helped me identify that specific person that I'm looking for.
I know for the employers, when I talk to them, that what they've noticed is, especially the companies like public sector that have big grids where they like, hey, we want to know these questions and stuff like that. And one of the health authorities was telling me that they would get a couple grids that had almost exactly the same answers. And the first grid they got like that, they're like, oh, it's such a good answer. This person totally gets it. But then they read like 2 or 3 more grids and they all said almost the same thing. And he was like, oh, okay, these people are using, AI to give them their answers.
Yeah.
So I think like it's a really powerful tool, and you definitely should still use it to say, hey, ChatGPT, here's a job description and here's my resume. And also here's the questions they're asking me. What kind of answers do you think I should give? For sure, use it to that to see, okay, this is the stuff that it thinks, but then you got to write your own stuff, because if it comes out and it looks the same as everyone else's, they're going to think that you cheated. Not that AI is totally cheating. It's a tool to help you, but use it to help you, not to necessarily, write your exact grid for you and then just submit that right away. Because
I totally agree. When I was doing my recruitment and searching, at some point, you're just reading the robots, and then you just feel like I'm reading the same thing over and over. And candidates, please pay attention when you are at least, working your cover letter, to make sure that you remove that part where the ChatGPT asks you, do you want me to write anything else? Because I've seen a cover letter. I've seen a cover letter that had the prompt, like the prompt from GPT. They really just copy and paste and didn't pay attention, in that. So that is massive. Like, attention to detail, 0. That you lose your opportunity right there, right? Like when you're taking the time. How many resumes as recruiters we need to go through and read about, and then you take the time to read that and to come down to something like, oh, that's frustrating. But at the same time, I also always like to remember that, as you mentioned, Curt, to use GPT, of course, to get some ideas, but also to help you remember things that you have accomplished. Because at the same time, people are answering the same thing, and it's just getting like so repetitive. And what we want to see on those cover letters are exactly your own experience and why that opportunity is aligned, how that is aligned to your career goals, right? And I think some of the candidates are losing the touch, that human touch, when working in the application. What do you guys think about that? Like, have you guys spot anything like I have seen? Like, have you seen anything like that, Jimmy?
No, nothing like that, right there. But after seeing all these resumes, even job descriptions, sometimes there's a very specific format that Gemini does, that GPT does. So you see that format and immediately you just know that they use some sort of LLM to write this. So I do take a deeper dive to see if they've actually like put in a personal touch to adjust things. But I almost feel like it's counterproductive because it actually now sets off a part of my brain when I see a job description from a manager that has that same format. I'm just like, is this the actual requirement, or is this just like they just put something together? So I'm curious to see what, how this technology will change how people think about it, because a lot of times when we see templates, it does set out a different part of your brain and you do judge what you're seeing a bit differently.
Yeah. I think with cover letters too, that a lot of times people will use a relatively generic cover letter that you can put through AI or whatever they're going to do, but the cover letter just talks about things that they like about themselves. And sometimes I think you miss your chance to go over the points that someone's really looking for, right?
Yes.
So if you're looking at a job description and you're going to take the time to put a cover letter together, that cover letter should directly address the things that they're directly wanting you to have. If you need 7 years of experience with, Oracle EBS or something like that, make sure cover letter says, I've got 8 years of experience with Oracle EBS, and I've done this and this and this with this implementation and these modules, right? Like, just tell them exactly so they don't have to read everywhere. This is how I fit in with what you're looking for, right? Or if they're like, oh, I really need something or somebody that's good at leadership, just be like a line. And you don't have to do 8 lines, just a line. I led a team of blah, 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 blah on this implementation. There you go, right? Like that kind of stuff goes a long way. Because if you just have this giant cover letter that doesn't actually address what they're looking for, what's the point of them reading it? They can already read your resume. It's just extra work. Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, that's actually something that these LMs are actually very good at. If you have a very lengthy resume and use that as an input, and then you put in the job description into ChatGPT and ask them, like, tell me about some qualifications that might be suitable for this job. They're very good at giving you prompts on what you've done. And so what you do is you take that prompt and then you add in the details about what you actually did, what your role was, how many people did you work for, the results of this project and things like that. And that actually builds a really good cover letter without copy and pasting directly from text prompt.
In going on in that too, there's a lot of times I'll get resumes from people and I'll see, so we'll talk to each person we send forward, right? We vet them, right? And we'll put, okay, this is why they're a good fit, because we do our own little cover letter we put at the top of the resume to say why they fit all the job description. But then sometimes I'll go to the resume, and the resume won't necessarily have all these things. So I'll remind the candidates a lot of times too, or Jimmy does a great job of this. Will go in there and help them to edit their resume. Make sure that the things that you're talking about that you have in your cover letter or whatever other supplemental things you're putting on there are actually in the resume. Because if they're like, oh, this person's really good at Oracle EBS, but then they go down and then there's no mention of Oracle EBS when they press Control F in your resume, they're not going to be like, okay, well, is this person really an Oracle EBS person at all? Like, it's not even in their resume. Like, it's probably not important to them. We're going to skip on the next person. So, changing the resume around to what skills you actually did, because you need to actually be, when you show up for the interview, who you say you are in your resume. But making sure that stuff's in there so they can see it is smart.
Exactly. Keep the consistency, right? Like what you have in but not only copying like the bullets, because another type of cover letters that I also have seen is that they sometimes just copy either the bullets from their resume or they just copy the bullets from the job description. And that's not exactly, correct me from your experience, but when I'm looking for a candidate, it's not exactly what you're looking for. You're looking for matching, of course, having that consistency. But it's a plus what you're adding on your cover letter. For example, that can be anything. Like sometimes you're hiring for, I don't know, let's say when you're expanding, my previous experience, we're expanding to Australia. So if you even have like a family member, that might be a great reason for you to, you're applying because you have a family out there. Just adding anything that is consistent and adds on to your application. That can even be like things that you were planning for your career, or even like personal items like about the location or about the opportunity that's a remote opportunity or anything like that. Just being creative. Not really, we rely on the technology in ChatGPT to get some ideas and prompts, but definitely not lose that point that we are humans in the looking for opportunities, right?
Yeah. I actually have a really good example of that. We have a logistics client that was looking for a business analyst a few years back, and they interviewed a bunch, and the person that they ended up going with was because he was a truck driver many years ago. And just, him identifying that and being like, I was a truck driver before and now I'm a BA and I have all of these experience, was the one that gave him the edge over another candidate just because of that. So it also kind of shows that like you actually read through their company and what they do. So when you point out those specific experience that you might think is not relevant for the resume, but you put that on there because you've now understood the role, is going to be the thing that might give you that edge.
That's key. That's key. I love it. For sure. You have to connect the dots. That really shows that you have done your homework, right? It's exactly the thing when they come like for the interviews, when you have candidate that doesn't really know what your company do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? That's number one homework. But touching to that, so tell me like what you guys have seen, like share some common mistakes that the candidates make that really can cost their jobs. Like what you guys have seen that could be helpful sharing with our audience to be careful with.
You wanna go first,
I think,
Jimmy?
Curt, you might be better at this because you prep people for that.
Yep. So whenever we get candidates in, I do a lot of the interview preps, and then I also get the feedback directly from the hiring managers afterwards. I have some pretty funny stories from that. I think one is you want to hit the authority principle, right? It's just there's a guy named Robert Cialdini that is a social psychologist that talks about what works in sales, what works in being persuasive, what works in just being able to be convincing for people. And an interview is you convincing somebody to hire you, right? So when you're interviewing, a lot of times people will maybe not look the part or walk the part or act the part or their technology doesn't work beforehand. I think honestly, the most common mistake I see these days is the team is a Microsoft Teams, or the interview is a Microsoft Teams interview, right? And then the candidate shows up on time to the interview, but their Microsoft Teams microphone isn't working and their lighting is different and their background is different, right? And like, there's just all the technology isn't working right. And especially if you're working with somebody like us, we're IT professionals, right? They're going to expect you to be able to figure out technology like Teams, which isn't the most complicated in the world. Now, it's a perfect product. I don't know. But it's definitely something that you should have figured out enough beforehand to you could sit on a meeting and talk to people to show them that you're technical. I think another thing there is how you walk, talk, dress, and act. With the dressing, I always tell people the reason that doctors wear lab coats or the reason that generals wear like a bunch of medals and uniforms and stuff is they want to show that they're in a position of authority or they're an expert in something, right? And when you're interviewing for something, most times, unless it's a junior role, you're trying to convince them that you're an expert in something. You are the person to hire. You're the right guy or lady or person. So you just want to make sure that you dress up in a way that an expert would. I have a good example of this. I had a guy one time that he was just this really good business analyst. He said all the right things. And then when I first vetted him, before we sent him forward to the client, he was like great on the phone. I was like, oh, it's so personable. They're going to love him. So then I did the interview prep when it was a Teams call like this. And I saw him on the Teams call and he was wearing this like big fedora. And he had like a necklace with a really big shark tooth right here, right? And I was talking to him about the same thing, the authority principle. I was like, for the interview, I would just make sure you look professional. You don't do anything that stands out too much. You just want to look like you know what you're doing. And he's like, oh, but this is fine, right? I'm like, I wouldn't necessarily go with that. Just like, it's a lot of personality to show right away. And I'm all for showing personality, but I think, a professional setting personality is kind of what you want to go for. And he insisted, he's like, nope. People really love this. My last job, I wore this stuff all the time. It's going to be great. I was like, I'm pretty sure it's not going to work out great if you do that. You can if you want. I'm not here to tell you what you do, but I highly recommend you don't. So sure enough, he did. And I got a call from the hiring managers right afterwards. They're like, who is this guy? Like, he looked like he was like on like a shark fishing trip or something. Like, sure, he sounded like he was doing the right things, but he's throwing us off. So he didn't get the job. I really think he would have got the job if he didn't do that. So
He had all the skills, like
he had all the skills. He was
know,
saying all the right things. He was actually really easy to talk to. Just, like little things like that, just making sure that you're ready for the resume, you look presentable, looks good, goes a long way, right? And you might not think, oh, okay, it's not a big deal because really they're going to care about how good I am technically and how well I interact. But, we're humans. Everything goes into account. Same thing with lawyers. Like lawyers who are really attractive statistically do better than lawyers that aren't as attractive, which they've done research on, right? So, for lawyers, same thing. Dress up, right? The nicer you look to a jury, the more likely it is they'll believe what you're saying. Same thing in your interview for all things, present well, talk well, stuff like that. Now, that being said, our stuff is mostly IT work. So I'm not saying go wear a tie and a suit for every interview. That's not required, right? But it's definitely...
We do have clients that do have that environment, though. So we'll tell them that's what you have to do for those clients.
Yeah. There's the classic is the wizard software engineer that, he's probably one of the top 10 smartest people ever. And he'll wear a sweater in a dark room with maybe sunglasses or something, when he gets on the interview. And his coding is so good, they have to hire him. But he would have got the job easier if he didn't wear a sweater in a dark room or a sweatshirt, So anyways, it's my big advice there as well, too.
yeah, no, that's great. Well, that's again comes down to that homework, right? Because depending on the company you're interviewing with, like what's the culture? And nowadays it's so easy to see what the company looks like. Usually the companies, they have pictures and, like about us, like what about us here? And then you show the picture, you can kind of get the sense of how people maybe like, if you're talking about dressing and how professional, what's the level of professionalism? Like I have to show up in that call, how much dress up. It's completely different, like a lawyer and, like a developer. I know we all like dress different, but we all need to be professional at some extent, when, especially speaking when you're talking to someone in an interview, right? Jimmy, what's been your experience? Like, what's the major mistakes you have seen that could be helpful to highlight for our audience?
I feel like Curt covered most of it. I mean, for me, because I do the initial screening of candidates, so it's less filtered. I do get a lot of people that haven't done research about the client, but that's fine because that's what we're here to tell them about. But I would say for me, the biggest one would be understanding a question and answering it, and then just leave it at that. I think that a lot of times people can rant, or they just go on nonstop, and they might be making really good points, but if they're not relevant to what they're trying to assess, that doesn't matter, right? So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me. And yeah, like Curt said, just like the way that you present yourself. I think in IT it's less formal, but I think people need to know that you can be, and that's the first impression is also very important. So they might let you wear the fedora and the shark tooth later on, but if you're gonna be the person that's gonna present yourself as I can only wear this forever, that might be a problem.
Yeah, that's so true. And you know what's it's interesting because as we were talking, I'm thinking back to the hiring days. And you know what? There's a difference when you have candidates coming from recruiters and when the candidates apply directly. Because as you guys mentioned, you guys kind of like debrief and you have a conversation. I think the candidates they can come a little bit more prepared. They usually have they're more prepared for the interviews than the candidates just apply directly. And this is how I came up with my with all the idea of the driven career, because the main one thing that I was noticing was like how people are not prepared for the interview. And that's something that you can see everywhere. You have so many resources out there. And I was just surprised how people would portray themselves like at the moment that you're supposed to just at least be your best because you want to get the job. At least I assume that everyone's going through an interview and applying, they want to get the job. And they're just not. Like that could be even like body language, like, the position kind of like this, or the screen of some people are not even turning on their screen, like the video, right? So that's
What? You've had
totally
people
red
interview and you
flag.
don't turn on their camera?
Because as you said, Curt, sometimes you're not preparing upfront for the link or something, and then the camera would not work or something happened, or the background wasn't, like you could see people's, like their bedroom or something. I don't know. I think we need to be a little bit careful with some details, because I think there are things that go beyond your resume. You might have an amazing resume, but how you portray yourself in that interview, in that process, just tells me a lot about your, how you behave, and tells me a lot how you're gonna be when I hire you. Like, and if you're not putting your best in your first interview, how's that gonna work? Because here's the trick. You guys are in recruitment and I was in HR, and at the end of the day, we were both sending our candidates to our hiring managers. So when you pass them to the hiring manager, it's like, how did you send me someone like this? Right? If they're not doing their best. This is how I came up with, like, I really want to help people with, preparing for interviews and all of that.
Even just like little things, I find there was a candidate I was talking to, and instead of responding to an email, they would send a whole new email. So when it comes to my inbox, it's not a threaded thing anymore. It's just a new email, and I have to find that new email every time. And right away, I was like, "You're a change manager. This is not gonna work." Like, I don't understand. I don't understand why, but yeah. Even small things like that, it can be a red flag as well.
Yeah, because you're looking for patterns, right? Like, it's whatever the candidate is sharing with you about their past experiences, because you want to look into the pattern. So if this person has to succeed on this, you just expect or you just assume that that's how they're going to perform. And that's the same thing for that very first moment we are here sitting for an interview.
Yeah.
Right. And let's talk about building our brand. So I think nowadays we talk a lot about branding, again, being careful how we portray ourselves as professionals. And we see that a lot on LinkedIn for those driven professionals that really invest on their profiles. What do you guys have to say about how they can build a strong profile that catches your attention? So you guys on the look. Curt understands the need of the company. Jimmy goes after the professionals. And what are the type of professionals and how they kind of like build up their branding that stand out to you? Like, how do they get your attention to get to connect with them?
Well, so I think every role is going to be a bit different, and also depending on the audience. In development roles, your GitHub's going to be your branding. I think, I'm not a developer myself, so I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between what's good and what's bad. But once I send that over to a engineering manager, they're going to look at that and, make that assessment. If we're talking about graphic designers, UX, UI designers, now that's a big part. But even then, sometimes I'll look at a profile or a portfolio website that looks really good, and a manager would come back and say, yeah, all this is visually appealing, but there's no substance in anything. They're not showing their user personas. There's no wireframing examples and things like that. So, it depends on what we're talking about in terms of branding. You could be a visually appealing resume and have a really good website. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to hiring, it really is about substance. And managers are really good at diving into a lot of those things. So I would say that, don't like have a really weird looking website that's old looking. But but if you have the substance, I think that's usually what people will be looking into.
Yeah, I think for a lot of candidates, like, it's LinkedIn, right? Especially if you're trying to find a job, it's LinkedIn. That's what we're using for the most part for most things, especially in the IT space, right? And a lot of times I'll see things where there's be really good candidates and they have what jobs they've done, and then they don't have a picture, and they also don't have any bullet points of what the heck that job is, right? It's just job titles, what years they were there, and you wonder if it's even up to date. And sometimes when we meet these people, like we find out later, these people are the really, really good ones that will get the job. Just it's way, way harder to find them, right? They might have been able to find a better job sooner that recruiters reached out to them for and got more money if they just put stuff on there that was worth seeing. Now, stuff that's worth seeing, I also think too, sometimes we'll put a lot of stuff that's kind of fluffy, right? It's just a lot of nice words, the big words that talk about he communicates well with stakeholders through various interoperable environments or something, right? Like just a bunch of words. But when you can put things on your resume, on your LinkedIn, or whatever you're doing to try to show your brand that are measurable, things that I have the certification, I have done this for 10 years, I worked on this implementation with this technology, I did this module, I used this cloud service to do that. Like saying exactly what you did and make sure it shows up places so that people like Jimmy can search and find you and you show up in those searches, as well as it's obvious that you've actually done that thing, goes a long way versus saying, I'm good at cloud technology and implementations. Like what cloud technology, what implementation have you done? That kind of stuff helps. And a lot of times too, like, now we have Control F. You can find anything you want on a resume or a LinkedIn profile. So having a little bit more information is sometimes better than having it be short. And I know a lot of times the common thread of thought is your resume should be 1 page, 2 page if you're really senior. But if it needs to be longer because you have that much experience and you need to talk about all kinds of different technologies, like if you're a developer that's worked in like 10 different projects and they all have different tech stacks that are massively different, you one should edit your resume a little bit to each job you're submitting to, but two, if it's for the marketing purposes being out there, put it all on a piece of paper. They'll find it by Control F or whatever they need to do, and it'll show up in Jimmy's search. You really want to show up in Jimmy's search. That's the way to do it. So I don't know what you think, Jimmy, but especially you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just even on that, I don't know if I'm going to get hate for this, but like a contractor and consultant is not a good job title. Yeah. I mean, not that like if you were like, like an AWS cloud consultant, then sure. But even then, like, what does a consultant really mean, right? An AWS consultant. Are you an engineer? Are you an architect? It doesn't really give you an idea of what that role actually is. And even like on a contractor side, like an Uber Eats delivery driver is technically a contractor. So like it doesn't give you any context. So I would say, those, when I see profiles that just have like consultant, it doesn't help. It doesn't help with the search.
Yeah. And it sounds like that doesn't really get much of your attention, hey?
Yeah, I mean, unless it's a very specific role that have very specific keywords that like that will pop up in the bottom. Otherwise, I would go look at the one that's more specific first.
Great, perfect, thank you. And how about compensation? So when you have your candidate talking with the employer, and they're coming from the recruiters, right? In this case, from you guys. What do you recommend? Like, what's the best practice? Should they touch into compensation throughout the process themselves, or should they leave that with the recruiters to advocate for them? What's your opinion on that?
I think for us, it's we always handle the discussion for compensation. There are a few reasons why that's a good idea. We just have more context about the client, their budget. We also are more exposed in industry, so we know what's like a reasonable salary and whatnot. So it makes it easier for us to negotiate on the candidate's behalf. The other thing is, sometimes we might get a candidate that goes into interview. We've already kind of discussed compensation. We've set expectations with the client. And then the candidate goes in and throws in another number. And now all of a sudden, the client's confused because they said, well, we've interviewed you based on, your resume and the number you said you're expecting. Yes. And now it's changed. We might not have interviewed you if you were telling us like a different number, right? So then it becomes a waste of everyone's time. So that's specific to agency recruitment. You want to always leave the negotiation to the agency, just because they just have more context for that conversation. And I find that candidates can generally be a bit more candid with recruiters, because we are able to provide that context as well, right? If someone tells me if their expectation is way too high, I can just stop them right there and say, this role is not going to pay you that. There's no reason, to even try.
Yeah.
Or there are situations where I would say like, actually, I think you might be able to give you a bit more than what you think. So it really just depends on um, what the role is and kind of your qualifications as well. It's very different though when you're going into an interview without an agency, because you have less context. You could go onto Glassdoor and things like that, but all those are like user generated information anyways. Like you can get an idea, but you can't take that for what it is, and things might have changed within the company. So I think that becomes a bit more difficult. But I think the move lately about pay transparency, both from the candidate and the client side, there's more job postings now where you see the actual compensation range and their benefits and whatnot. I think that's good. It's always better to have more transparency than like, what's the highest you're willing to pay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like
I
that
want the top of range.
transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think that that sets the tone how the company is organized, because there are many times that some employers, they don't want to put their salaries out there, but first because they don't have the structure internally, you know, or like they don't have the structure, and then it puts them in a bad, like in a tough situation. But I think from the point of view of the candidate, it's great when we see that. I mean, in BC, that is mandatory now, but it's not all the places. I work with some people applying for other jobs across the globe, and that's not the case in other countries. So that's a good thing from BC.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started recruitment, the general practice is you don't tell people the client name and you don't give people the rate. You just give them the job description. Um, but I've never actually followed that, because I'm like, I'm gonna have to talk to you about this later on anyways. So even when I first started, I was throwing the client name and the numbers out. And back then, a lot of people would actually respond, "Oh, I appreciate you giving me this information up front, and just let me know if they're interested or not." But I think that's more general now. I think most recruiters would actually provide that information up front.
Yeah, with the salary stuff too. I know on my end when I'm talking to the clients, if I get somebody that like, we always want to lock down whatever they're gonna what their expectations are salary wise before we send them in. And when people say, "Oh, we'll see how it goes after the interview and then we'll negotiate," like, the
Mm.
employers really don't like that. I get a call from them saying, "Hey, they talked about salary in the thing," or say they tell me like, "Okay, Curt, you're guiding this, you're responsible for the salary. I want to ask for more now that I realize that the job is different," or something like that. And then it makes us look bad, and then I have less bargaining
Yeah.
power to help you get the job. But two, then they'll say, "Oh, do we really want to hire this person? They're already asking for more money now. Like, are they just going to ask for another raise in 6 months? Are they going to be a problem child? Like, I don't want to do that." Like, it's way easier if you want to ask for a big number. It's way easier to do it in the beginning than it is after I've submitted you and you're going through the interview process or being vetted. So if you think you might want a bigger number, go with it. Like, I would do that. It will maybe reduce your chances of getting the job, but if you're not going to take the job anyways, unless it's that bigger number, don't give us
Yeah.
anything less, right? Like,
Yeah.
worst is people saying, "Okay, I'll take the bottom of the range so I get an interview, and then I'll talk them in about how valuable I am and try more." It's just it makes everything more difficult for everybody, and will maybe, if you do get the job, probably start you off on a difficult foot in comparison to just telling them the truth.
Yeah.
And
And
Curt
that's
and
so
I,
awkward as well.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
awkward. Yeah,
and Curt and I have these conversation quite often. Sometimes, for me, I hate negotiating. It's just my personality. I hate negotiating. So I just tell me a number. I'm gonna submit you. If I think it's reasonable, I'm gonna submit you that number. And sometimes Curt will come back and be like, "Hey, I've seen these other candidates are competing. This one is just not as competitive if I send at this number." So Curt will actually come back to me and say, "We can do it, but they might not get an interview because we've had these people with more experience, or uh, you know something that's a better fit." And most of the times when I go back to a candidate and kind of explain that, they're willing to, be submitted at a more reasonable number. And I think that's also just another advantage of working with agencies, that we can provide you with a bit more information of the people we're seeing that's going for the exact same role. And what we want to do is make sure that everybody is going in as competitive as possible.
Yeah. And I agree what you said, Jimmy, that I agree that people will feel more comfortable to speak about their salary expectation with recruiters. But other than that, I think candidates should be clear about that anyways, because, it's so awkward if they start with one expectation and just along the way, they just start changing and it just looks bad for everyone. Like it's a horrible experience.
I'm curious, because I've never worked in internal recruitment before. I've seen posts on LinkedIn that's about like always negotiate and things like that.
Yeah.
And I personally, I just don't agree with that at all, because in my mind, I'm like, because first of all, I don't ever really like negotiating. Just give me a number and I can get your job or not, kind of thing. And then also just like, do you really want to work for an employer that's going to try and nickel and dime you by negotiating your salary? I would rather work for an employer that's just going to tell me what they're going to pay me for the job that I'm going to do for them. If the employer is going to pay me a few grand less than this other person for doing the same work, like I don't really want to work for that employer anyway. So I don't really see the whole negotiating approach.
What do you think about, so if they're not applying through somebody like us, Jimmy, if they're going to just apply themselves, should they put on their submission, hey, this is the salary expectation I'm thinking I should do? Or if you were going to apply for a job yourself, what would you think you should do?
I don't think I would give up that information immediately, but I think a lot of jobs now ask you for your range anyways when you apply. So either way, they're going to know.
Yeah, usually when we were opening the new positions, you have it's kind of like mandatory to answer that, to submit your application. It's mainly because you want to know what's the minimum that takes for me to talk with that person. So the hiring managers, they want to know what's their salary expectation, and then just to make sure that we can start talking, because sometimes you have a internal range and someone might be much more experienced and they're expecting more, and then it's just a waste of time of everyone bringing that person, talking to them to understand that's not exactly the fit, and then you had the entire team talking and we are not aligned on that. So that's just good to know, at least like a range. I think it's nice when you put a range, expectation, not exactly a number, because it takes so many other aspects to negotiate. When you're switching jobs, there are so many other things that we need to consider. That comes down to, are you moving from your city? What's the type of work? Maybe even level of autonomy. Nowadays, possibility to work from home. That's something that's very, it's super common nowadays. I think there are a lot of people that they're even taking a little bit less if they can work fully remote than having to commute and going to work every day. Yeah. So there are a lot of things that comes down to negotiation, but it's just important to know at least what's the minimum to start the conversation.
Yeah. I've also talked to managers before that would, if they like someone, they have kind of their set salaries that they would just pay an employee for that role. Even if their expectation is lower, they would still offer it. And the idea is that the employee is eventually going to find out that they're getting paid less. So they don't want that in the organization, right? So they're just like, people that's doing the same job should be paid the same. Not every company is like that, obviously, but I kind of agree with that philosophy.
A lot of the bigger ones are doing that. So my brother works in a big tech corporate America, right, or whatever. And almost all the big ones that he's been with so far kind of have pay bands, right? They're like, okay, you're software developer 1. You are going to get this salary and that's it. And if you're in a different location, say you work in Boston, but you actually go in the office, you do this or whatever, right? And then he just moved to LinkedIn actually too. And same thing, they got bands or whatever. This is what we're going to pay or whatever, just to keep it equitable so people know what they're going to make. So there isn't all of this kind of back and forth negotiation stuff. people can say, oh, that's good enough for me, or it isn't good enough for me. And then if they want more money, they got to earn a raise. But then they have more tiers and stuff too as well. Say, okay, well, you're a little bit more advanced, therefore we'll give you the higher thing. So
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think it's a little bit of the pain of the HR, when you are working with the hiring managers. That's how it's our role in HR, like advocating for the candidates or for the employees. Because in my experience, I have heard, like, why is this person making more than the other one if they have the same title and they started on the same day? And I heard, well, that's because the candidate A negotiated more.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear those things, right? And then that's why, I mean, from my HR background, I prefer having like the structure and at least having something that you justify, because I think the future is it's just becoming more and more transparent. And also people talk. People
Yeah,
talk. They will
exactly.
know. And
Yeah.
then, how about that trust? And then that would definitely impact on their experience, the employee experience, and the trust, mainly the trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Moving a little bit about for the end of the process. So when the candidates is are applying for jobs, you are a little bit anxious about. You want to hear from the employer, and I totally get that. I respect that. I always like to be very respectful with all candidates. But not always you can provide like a quick feedback and tell them where you are at in the process. Um, from the recruitment side, like from you guys, what's your advice for the candidates, how they can follow up without sounding too pushy, like how they can, get in touch with the company, like to understand where am I standing. Some companies, they do a great job to quickly give it back, but some of them not so quick. And when people are looking for jobs, they need a job, and they need to know what's going on. So what's the best practice for them to follow up?
I think it depends on like your reason for following up. If it's just to know, then I'm kind of like it's kind of like a free for all. It's depending on how you want to present yourself. I personally don't mind when people call me or email me just to ask for an update, and I'll let them know that I don't know, or that they've proceeded with some people, but we don't know how those interviews are going to go. So maybe they might come back. So I don't mind providing those updates. Now, if you have a job offer at hand and there's another job you'd rather like, that's I think very different. Because I've heard of scenarios where the company is not ready to make the decision yet, and if another person has an offer and they follow up, they're just like, okay, well then we're not gonna compete. We're just gonna say you're out and you can take that other offer. So that does happen. And I don't have an answer. I don't have a right answer for you to how to do it, other than if it's an urgent decision you have to make, you kind of just have to do it anyways, right? Like, if you don't follow up, you might lose out on both.
yeah.
So yeah, I know that's not a great answer, but that's just the truth, I think.
It's a reality, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think it helps up too sometimes if when you're following up, you have something more to ask than just wanting to know where they are in the process or what they thought of your application, right? If you had any sort of bond with this person, or you knew, hey, did that project move forward, or anything else there that can be helpful, just so that, because let's say you're a HR person, and especially if you're applying for intermediate or junior level jobs, and you've got you put a job on Indeed or something, right? And then you got 500 applicants. Of those 500 applicants, 150 are probably people that are actually in the area you want, because you got a bajillion people applying from places that aren't reasonable, or their resumes aren't very good to the point where you're just not even going to bother, or something like that, right? And then from that, then you narrow down all the people that actually fit the requirements. And I know there's a lot of advice on the internet that says, oh, you don't fit all the requirements? No worries, you're close, apply anyways. And I think now, especially with the market it's so competitive if you're not pretty close to what they're looking for, it's very unlikely you'll get the job, right?
Yeah.
Look how close you actually are, because not that you're wasting somebody's time, but it's unlikely that you'll do that stuff. And that comes the thing too. People are frustrated. Well, how do I get experience when in a job when no one will hire me and every job requires experience, right? That's hard. I get that. But I think knowing that helps too. But from there, being able to think, okay, now they've picked 10, 12 people they're going to interview. They got to go through interviewing all of them. There's always one or two people that couldn't interview at that time, so it's going to move out a week. Then the hiring managers all get together, and the hiring managers have jobs that they're actual jobs besides hiring that they got to do all the time. So their whole mindset isn't focused on I got to hire one person. Their mindset is focused on like 18 other things. They've got their own boss time. They got to finish their TPX reports on time. Like all kinds of things. So it does take longer than it feels like it should. And I think giving people the space and the patience to know that it'll take a while sometimes is helpful. That being said, if you are an employer, the faster you are on getting back to people and hiring, one, the better the Glassdoor reviews are going to be. And two, the more likely it is you'll get who you want.
Yes.
There's that.
That's so true. Candidates are putting out there their experience about their recruitment process. That's another thing that the companies, must be careful about how you're handling your recruitment process.
Yeah. I think now, I hate to say it, it seems standard practice to if you submitted your application to something, it's not required they ever respond to that. But if you get an interview and they don't give you feedback or let you know you're out or somehow, I'd say it's probably faux pas. But yeah, just because, like, especially nowadays, like when I talk to people, especially the introductory, like junior people, they'll throw their resume to so many places because they've got tools to do it, right? Like it's easier now to apply to a lot of different jobs. And people can like, oh, I applied to 100 jobs last week, right? And like, that's a lot of jobs to apply to.
Yeah, what's interesting, when I go to networking events, I always say like, yeah, you should just submit your resume. Even if you don't get the first time, submit it a second time, because you never know what the circumstances are for why they didn't contact you. Or you might have been just a runner-up before they get to that interview. So the next time you submit, you might get that interview. But then on the other side, sometimes I'll wake up and I'll get a notification from the same person applying to this whole range of jobs. And what I do is I just copy them all and just delete it, because I don't even look at it, because I'm just like, you're not seriously looking for a job that you actually want. You're just looking for a job, any job.
Yeah.
And I don't want that.
Yeah.
Like somebody that applies for a project management position, but also a software engineer position, but also
exactly. Yeah. I mean, if they were applying for all of this similar roles, then yeah, that makes sense. You're just a person that's looking for a job within your field. But if you're applying for everything on the job board, if you're not going to spend time looking at my job description, then I don't feel like I need to spend time looking at your resume.
Yeah. Some companies have places where you can just drop them a resume so they can have it in their system too. We have that for sure, right? You can give us your resume, we'll put it in our system. But if you're not sure this is the perfect job I'm a fit for and I should be doing this job, you can drop a resume in there, and then they'll reach out and contact you if they have something that you are actually a pretty good fit for. They do look at those most of the time, as far as I know. So that might be the way to go if you're trying to apply to literally everything at one company. Like if you've always wanted to work for Microsoft, maybe don't apply all the ones at Microsoft. You just give them a resume.
And I've seen like job postings now too, where they will have a general job submission.
Yeah.
It'll just be like, if you're just interested in our company, but there's no role right now, put your resume here. And I think that's a really good approach.
That's right. I think that's the best approach, because usually you have this general opening. That's where you want to apply, not applying for all the roles, because you're not fit for those roles. But if you're in general, and usually we touch into that. I think people don't believe that the HR is going to look, but at least I was always taking a look and seeing, let's see what's in here, and then sometimes you would find someone, or even because you are connected to the company and you know what's coming up. So sometimes you already have that resume up front, even like before they open the position. So that is a good strategy as well.
I mean, for us, I don't think we look at everything that comes through that inbox, but your profile will be in our system. So when we have a role and I do a search, like your resume will then come up. So the idea is just being searchable, not just on LinkedIn or different job boards, just you're actually in that company now. This is the ATS, and they'll be able to find you directly.
Nice. And what do you think about when you send over a candidate through your efforts, and then the candidate ended up getting in touch with the hiring managers directly?
Oh, I don't love that one. I like for me, I'm the relationship manager, right? And my sole job is to number one, take care of the client, number two, take care of you, right? And if you bypass that, one, it makes me look bad because then the employer thinks, oh, your candidates don't know the rules, and also they're kind of doing whatever. Two, you could send it in a different direction and step on a mine that, like, because it's like that would totally, torpedo the whole job, right? So usually you just want to let Jimmy and I handle it, right? And if you're using agency,
Yes.
we're experts in this. That's what I do. 8 hours a day is help navigate people to help them get jobs and get to know clients and find out what they need. So going directly isn't the way to go. Now, if it becomes a situation where the candidate and the hiring manager or whoever should talk more, talk to me if you want that, both employer or candidate. A lot of times I can set that up. But then I can also prep you for, this is probably what they think. I can find out what both parties are thinking beforehand, make sure it's a good idea, make sure it's in the right situation, make sure everybody knows all the information beforehand. So it works out a lot better.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I wanted to throw this question out there just so people learn and see what's going on, what's the best practice, because that happens, and I think that's important to share this with everyone else that is working with recruiters.
Yeah, I think it's very rare that the conversation would go better directly when you're working through an agency. Oftentimes we actually find managers like, we're working with agencies because we don't want to deal with this.
Sure.
And
Exactly.
So, yeah,
They
and
don't have the
so
capacity.
yeah. So that's why I think just doing that initial reach out, trying to do it directly it's usually not what they want.
If you know somebody in the company, or you know somebody who knows somebody at the company, tell us in the agency if that's something that's worth leveraging. Like, that's not a terrible idea. Sometimes it backfires because maybe they know you from something else, but then they also know, oh, hey, we shouldn't hire that person. He's not the right cultural fit, right? So we should find out what that other person thinks about you first if we can. But, knowing somebody is the best way. Again, like referrals, like close or people get jobs through referrals faster than any other type of way to apply, right? So if you have that plus the agency on top of it, it's very likely we can get you in.
But I think people will also be surprised a number of times we've gotten reference checks done and the reference come back not good. You think that if you're giving someone's information for reference, they would be a good reference, but a lot of times, well, not a lot, there are a number of times where it's been bad. And so we actually help a bit in terms of like, ooh, do you have more references? Because we want to put you in the best light. Maybe you just didn't have a good working relationship with that particular person that you don't even know, right?
I think some hiring managers are just too harsh on people too. They're just like, I can't give anyone an 8 because I'm not a give a person an 8 kind of manager. They get a 6, But another manager like 10s across the boards, even though they weren't that good, right?
They could also, like, we've seen ones where they give really bad ratings, but then at the end they'll be like, yeah, I'll hire this person again. And so we would like call back and be like, hey, this doesn't look good. Can you elaborate just so we can like fix that?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you, guys. No, that was great. I loved everything. Well, our time is just coming to the end now. So just before we wrap up here, I want to check in and see, is there anything else that you guys would like to share? Anything that we haven't talked about and that would be great for our audience to know and learn a little bit more about when they're on the job search?
I feel like we covered a lot of things.
I give a plug for Ignite. We're Ignite Technical. Jimmy and I both work there. We're really good at finding people jobs, as well as if you have a job that needs to get filled, we make that way easier. We're cheaper than using internal recruiters if you don't have a ton of job volume, or if you really need help because the jobs are difficult or the recruitment staff you have is overwhelmed, or maybe they're just not getting you what you need. We're very good at helping you get what you need, and we can supplement internal recruitment teams, HR teams. I love working with HR professionals. I've had some of the most smoothest experience working with them that way as well too. So we get the way.
Yeah, and I think for the candidate side, it really is just, I think that personalization of resumes, I think if you talk to every recruiter out there, um, you think that, you're applying for a bunch of jobs, people might not even see your resume, but I think the customization of that resume is really what's gonna make them see that resume, right? If you're submitting the same resume to every single job, chances are, a lot of those jobs, they probably won't even like really be strong, because if it's general, then there's going to be someone that's catered their resume to that job and they're going to get looked at first.
That's very good. Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you so much, Curt. Thanks for your time. And for all of you that have been here with us and stayed with us to the end, thanks for your audience. Thanks for listening to us. We hope that this was helpful to you. Please make sure to leave your comments. And if you have any questions, you can find our links here on our description from this episode. So you can easily get in touch with me or Jimmy or Curt. And we thank you so much for listening to us. We really hope that was inspiring and helpful to you. Thank you very much and stay driven.
Yeah, stay driven.